Call this meeting of the Tyler ISD Board of Trustees to order. We do have a quorum. The meeting has been duly called, and the notice of the meeting has been posted in the time and manner required. Thank you, everybody, for coming out today. We have public participation. Anybody? Bueller? Anybody? Okay. Okay, the first part of our agenda is continuous improvement. We have the T-test evaluation and class size update. Mr. Bitter.
Yeah, Mr. Bitter coming to the microphone, sit at the table so that the board can ask him questions about our T-test data up to this point. We're committed to certainly measuring our progress and where we're at as far as our classroom observations. We've been doing this now for, I think, 3 years. This is the third year to do it. Have not really developed a trend yet, but we're certainly getting to that point to where we can kind of know where we need to land, where the sweet spot is. So, Mr. Bitter, if you'll take the board through a review of what T-test is and where we currently stand as far as our observations go.
Well, thank you, Dr. Crawford. Good morning, President Washman, members of the board. I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you guys a little bit about instructional leadership and supervision and kind of how we monitor some of those processes and what that looks like for us. And so we'll take you through. Certainly stop me at any time if you have a question or are wondering, and certainly we'll take questions at the end. So first off, just with T-test, what the overview is, and you've heard this a little bit, and our understanding of that and how we can use it continues to develop. But it is a process that seeks to develop habits of continuous improvement. And so should be ongoing two-way communication based on the evidence that we receive when we go into the classroom. And then we talk a little bit about professional development and how that feedback that we get while we're in the classroom drives some of those decisions. That feedback loop, primarily, we want to have an ongoing open communication between appraiser and teacher. We want to be very effective and determine our effectiveness of instruction based on some of the evidence that we get, and we want to provide feedback. You know, that's one of the big things that when you talk about improving instruction and continuous improvement, feedback is a huge piece of that process. Very easy to walk in somewhere and identify areas of need or things that could happen better. A little more difficult to allot the time and be very intentional about the way that you provide feedback to people and help them work through becoming a better instructor. And so that last one there, identify action steps for improvement. None of those things matter unless we put some action steps on paper and stick to them, hold each other accountable for following that process. All right, so the rubric, and you guys have seen that before, and I certainly will not read that off to you, but one thing I will say about the rubric is that once upon a time, you could go into the classroom and kind of just look at behavior of the kids and see, you know, were we acting up and different things like that. PDOS allowed a lot of leeway in that. T-test becomes much more specific, and so we try, when we stick with the feedback, to stick to the domains and the dimensions that they're going to be appraised on, because those allow us to identify some specific adult behaviors that are aligned with those things and then move forward. So pretty simple formula for success in T-tests and for success from an instructional standpoint. You notice if going from improvement needed to distinguish, we just go from, you know, who's doing the work? Is it teacher-centered? Is it student-centered? Who is the focus of what's going on in the classroom? Okay? And I say simple. It is a simple formula, but it's certainly not easy. Doing things that are specific and intentional that promote a student-driven learning environment. And they require some pretty intense planning and being very specific about what we're doing and when, and the kids we have in front of us and addressing their needs. All right, so a little bit about walkthrough numbers. So total walkthroughs so far this fall, and this is only the fall semester, so it's not up to date. It is only for the first semester. But it is at the elementary level, 1,576 walkthroughs, and so that's about 42 per appraiser. Okay, so a little bit down from last year. Similar with the secondary totals. 1,443 total and 44 by appraiser. And so I think specifically in numbers, that doesn't really mean a whole lot. Looking at, a little bit down, and Dr. Crawford mentioned that kind of what that sweet spot is and where the comfort level is. I think where we focused a lot of our time and energy with those folks is on the time spent in feedback. So rather than a 5 or 10 minute session in a classroom and then an email or something in your inbox that says, hey, this is what we got, but something with some specific feedback, and then, like I said earlier, some follow-up time for coaching, feedback, and continuing that loop of communication. And a T-test walkthrough is different than a PDOS walkthrough. I spent very little time as a principal with the T-test system, only 1 year, but it is much more time-consuming. It requires your knowledge of the rubric to be very good, and then your ability to coach people and give feedback. You have to have those skills, and you have to make time for it, set it out, script conversations, and address specific areas. And so a T-test walkthrough is kind of like a mini observation, just much more specific in what you're looking for and what you're giving feedback on. So total so far for the first semester, walkthroughs a little over 3,000. Do want to put up their observation totals, about 650. And that's about 55% of our teachers across the district have received their formal observation. And then numbers-wise, that's about 2.5 per teacher. Okay, so about 55% of our district has received 2.5 walkthroughs and their 45-minute observation, and are pretty extensively through that process when it comes to the T-test appraisal. We'll still get walkthroughs in the spring, and then also move through the summative evaluation process. So that's a fairly comprehensive look. We do have a couple of campuses that are 100% finished with their 45-minute observations, and have quite a few walkthroughs, obviously, in the bank. And quantity does not always equal success. A higher number of walkthroughs, so to speak, doesn't always equal success, but a greater frequency of quality feedback does increase success. So, any questions that you have for me at this time?
I have one.
Yes, sir.
Is there a T-test calendar where the teachers have a certain, I know there used to be one, but does that still exist where they have to have, all administrators have to have their evaluations done by a certain date?
Yes, sir. We do have, obviously the state provides some guidelines, and then we have a district calendar that we provide to principals and teachers as well.
Okay.
And it's got a few dates on there where you're not allowed to go into a classroom, a day right before a holiday or a different something like that, specifically for the T-test. You can still go in and obviously check on what's going on and see what's there, but formally anyway, those are kind of off limits, similar to PDOS.
My question is very similar to Mr. Sterling's question. We usually had calendars and you had deadlines to meet, so I assume everyone knows within a certain specified time they need to have these 45-minute formal observations done.
Yes, ma'am, and that is, actually I believe that our district calendar is a little bit tighter than the state calendar. The state calendar gives you a little bit more leeway, but obviously we want to finish those processes early, and
right.
Because the goal of it is improvement, and it's one thing to meet the deadline, but the earlier in that process you meet the deadline, the more productive your feedback can be, because it's about impacting the instruction that is provided to our students. And so we do have a specific evaluation calendar that says when you will have your observation done by, when your summative evaluation will be completed by, and those sort of things.
We do have some deadlines in place, a little tighter than the state because of offering contracts for the next year. So, we want to make sure that we have all of our stuff in the system before we go and extend that marriage proposal a little bit further, or in the engagement further, or maybe the dating ceases. So that is a little bit tighter. The other thing I said was we always encourage our principals to give themselves a Valentine's Day gift. and try to get a bulk of their appraisals and their formal observations finished and get it all done. And the last thing I'll say is we also preach, you know, it's always fun to, if you're a high school principal, to go in and listen and watch, spend a whole lot of time in the AP U.S. History teachers class, because sometimes they're the best one. Sue Blanchett was at my campus. But that's not where you're as impactful. I mean, I think you need to really coach the ones that are already doing a great job, certainly need to be compliant and get them their appraisal. But the ones that are struggling, the ones that need the coaching, the ones that need the observations the most are the ones that the classrooms we encourage our folks to be in. So I think that we said 2.5 per teacher. It's our philosophy that it's really not 2.5 per teacher. It's really going to be focused to where we need to make the most improvement to help kids. So.
And, you know, certainly like anywhere, and a couple of former principals obviously understand that, you know, we're going to have some teachers that have 5 or 6 or 7 at this point, and a lot more feedback and different things like that. And some of them, you know, your AP US history teacher or a rock star somewhere that may not require as much direct supervision and feedback in some of those areas. So one thing that I did have one extra slide that I skipped there, but how do we monitor some of those things? You know, so what do we work through there? Well, obviously we have some numbers and reports, and we can see, you know, if I'm having a teacher that I've got a teacher that struggles in this area, or we pull some data and identify an area of need, then we can go back and give some feedback and say, hey, look, we're struggling over here, but it doesn't look like we spent a lot of time, you know, with this particular person. Review that and kind of go through the coaching there. We do use it directly to identify professional development needs. You know, if we're struggling in certain areas that are on that rubric, how do we work with teaching and learning in different, you know, parts of our organization to provide some remediation there, some intervention. And then some of the things that we do as groups, we have some coaching cycles that we lead, some of the executive directors. They're pretty much diagnostic. You know, how do we go in and identify what's going on in the classrooms, some trends there, and then what are the most important areas we need to focus on? What can we do that will provide an impact across the board to the most kids? And then learning walks where we kind of go and see if those things are being effective. You know, is the coaching, if we're looking for certain things to be happening in the classroom and we've provided PD, training, support, and coaching, is that stuff showing up? You know, are we getting the outcome from, you know, the work that we're doing? So that's a little bit about how we monitor that.
A little different than when we were all principals. There's no doubt about it. This is a lot. Get a better chance to develop your tier 1 instruction using this instrument. The old PDOS method was based on a Likert scale. If you like them, you pass them. I'm just kidding.
No.
But it really
can't do that.
was. I mean, you didn't have a lot of room in there, and the design of it allowed for compliance and efficiency. You got to spend a little time on T-tests now, and we have to get recertified every year. I think y'all have to get recertified every year, don't you? I know the principals every 2 years.
I think if you do it in the right window, you can
Okay.
you can squeeze a 2-year out of
There
it. But
you
it
go.
is very much an ongoing process.
PDOS, we went and took PDOS and ILD when we got our principal certification. And then there was really nothing after that for you to be an actual appraiser, except for you having a job and being identified as a principal or a principal supervisor. But now you have to go through that biannual type of certification. I've gone through the training, but I don't have to go through the certifications every year. But it's a pretty tough deal. You know, we've also redesigned how we appraise counselors. Is yet to be presented to me yet. What I've asked for the redesign of how we appraise others in central office. So everybody takes my lead and tries to turn our current appraisal instrument that has a lot of Likert to it. Y'all know Likert, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 3's average. There's a whole lot other. We've kind of tried to redesign that as well. So there's no doubt if you're gonna improve at something, it needs to be measured, it needs to be authentic. And I think this is something that's improving for us.
Yes, sir.
Y'all have anything else?
That's all I have.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Bitter.
Thank you.
Then we have a class size update.
We have Tasha Bjork that's here today to go over any questions you may have about class size update. As y'all know, a few years ago, we were fortunate enough to put a local committee together. We all love committees, but this one was a really good one that came up with some really good stuff. And our District of Innovation Committee developed a District of Innovation plan to present to the board, and the board actually approved that in 2017. We'll actually need to get that, I think, reviewed this summer. Some of those things are calendar start date, some of y'all's favorites, the calendar start date. That's one. Another one is on certifications as well, which is really truly proving to be a benefit for our school system on being able to provide a local teacher certification to someone with a degree, as opposed to having a substitute teacher full-time, long-term in a class that may not have even gone to college at all. That's been beneficial. But another thing that was beneficial is our reporting back to the state in regard to waivers as far as the 22-to-1 in our classes. And here today, Tasha Bjork's going to present to you, and I think we're pretty tight budget-wise and not going too crazy with our budget, but also maintaining a very tight, close proximity to 22-to-1 as allowed in the District of Innovation, reporting it here locally to the Board of Trustees. Ms. Bjork?
Good morning. This is our second semester report. We did one back in October for the first. And at the end of January, there were 23 classes that were over the 22-to-1, and that comprised about 42 students. And there's a chart here on the bottom split out between bilingual and monolingual. The one thing I wanted to note is in October when we did this, we had 34 classes, so it's down 11, and we had 55 students, so down 13. So it averages, the classes that are over average a little under 2. I mean, most of them have 1, but some have a little more. So the way this chart works is the first columns are which grade level and how many classes, and then the last column is the number of students for, like, for example, at Jack, 4 classes in second grade are over, but it's only 5 students. Any questions?
I have one on Pete. It looks like 2 classrooms, but 8 students. Are they
It's
over?
bilingual. And if I'm remembering correctly, I think she felt comfortable with the teachers in that. Let me look and see. Yeah, they're both bilingual, and those were, one's 24 and one's 28. The one with 28 is a stronger teacher, but we do have aides in
And
there.
you have full-time.
Well, the way this works, it's a half aide per class that's over, so it's sharing an aide.
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
The move from 31 classes roughly in the fall to 23, is that we added a couple of teachers or kids went away, or how did we
I
get
don't
better
think
there?
We might have added 1 teacher, but normally it's common. It's really high when we first start school, and it always drops, as well as average daily attendance always drops in the spring. So it's pretty typical.
Another factor is leveling.
Yes.
Whenever we're already staffed, and then there's a pocket somewhere to where start the school year out, and there's a way for one campus to go ahead and dissolve a class and send those kids to other teachers, we can actually move that teacher somewhere else instead of going and hiring a brand new one. We don't like doing that because it's so hard when you start the school year off with your teacher. And so we don't do that as often. I think we did have one of those this year, though. We did. And we've had probably half the years I've been here, every other year, we wind up leveling a class and sending
Usually
a teacher
4 or
somewhere
5.
else.
But
Yeah.
this year it wasn't as great.
Yeah.
But if you think about it, when you're looking at 23 classes, if you added teachers at $45,000 a teacher, it can really be expensive when you're only looking at 42 kids. So we feel like this is a better option.
Being kind on that 45, it's 60 by the time you get through with,
Yes.
you know, benefits and things like that, so, or 50, 55,
Yeah.
yeah.
Tasha, in a classroom where there are 28 students, has anyone consulted with the teacher? I know you said the principal feels like it's okay, but how's the teacher doing?
I would have to refer to the the person that's over that school, but I know they feel pretty comfortable with it. But Dr. Davis isn't here, I don't think, today. It's the fourth grade. It's
Fourth at Pete.
I can tell you.
Yeah.
It's right here.
They wouldn't, I mean, knowing the principal there, knowing Dr. Davis, they wouldn't let us, they would have requested a different, strategy
Here, John.
if that was not a,
She
comfortable
is-
thing.
I know this teacher. She is an experienced teacher
Okay.
that has solid data. She actually was a teacher at Griffin, and she's transferred to Pete a couple of years ago, so she definitely has it under control, that teacher. So. She's experienced.
Good, I'm glad
You know, another thing on the bilingual stuff, Rev, is that's federal. As far as trying to figure out a way to get find a bilingual teacher, and we all know that,
yeah, that's the other
you
point.
know, I go to superintendent meetings and we're all wanting to fight each other over the same people. We all go to Spain. We all go to Puerto Rico. We all go to, we're all starting to get into Mexico now to try to find the same folks. So, a lot of that, sometimes you get stuck in the situation that as far as the bilingual requirements of an actual classroom. And then there are other strategies that teacher of record and things like that, to where we can make sure they still get quality instruction in other areas as well. I'm not sure how Pete is structured, if they do that one classroom. Do they split up, Johnita? Does that one teacher just teach those kids, or do they actually? She teaches math? Okay, so it's a math class. So when they go to reading or somewhere else, there's a little bit of change in classes there, to where still the same number of kiddos, but as far as exposure and assistance and where they go, we can do that as well. So, and Pete's got about a 95% attendance rate, maybe 94.
You asking me?
I'm just trying to think off the top of my head. I know Julie's not here.
I don't know.
So, I mean, 28 is usually per day. If you're worried about how many kids she gets per day, 28 is probably 25 by the time you think about it, as far as average classes. So, anyways, that's just some
The
some
option
strategies
was
and
there to
theories behind
hire a
that.
teacher too, but we couldn't find a good one.
Are we still working on the Grow Your Own?
Absolutely.
Oh,
It's the
yes.
BEST program.
Mm-hmm.
What does BEST stand for? What's that acronym stand for? If somebody from HR was here today, they could tell us.
Barely educated students teaching?
Beginning educators. Yeah. But that's part of that Grow Your Own program that we shook our hand with A&M Commerce last week. It was a three-pronged attack. It was getting Tyler kids to go to A&M Commerce to where they can get really good scholarships. It's also a Grow Your Own pipeline in there as well for future educators, future teachers, and then obviously the master's program as well. So yes, ma'am, we have that. In fact, the scholarshiping, because that's part of our little scholarship, and you sign your contract, come back to Tyler to work here, and we'll pay for some of your
Right.
debt.
I do know about that
Yeah.
because Laura goes over to the CTC Center
We need to have
talk to those
Miss
teachers.
Kano, excuse me, I was gonna call. We need to have Miss Kano present to the board about that.
Mhm.
So that way
Yes.
y'all are familiar with that program. But we're actually gonna have a couple of early enrollees coming out that aren't really part of that program, but they're wanting to come back and teach in Tyler. And it's some of our kids that actually came up through our program, did some career technology education programs, classes with future education. And I think that'd be a good start for that. So yes, ma'am, the Grow Your Own is fully alive.
All right.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions or comments? Okay.
Thank you.
Moving on to our action items, do we have to separate these for any reason? The election No? Lawyers are shaking their heads no? Okay. Well, we have approval of order calling for elections for school board trustees for members, districts 2 and 4. And we also have the interlocal agreement between Smith County and City of Tyler and TISD, Tyler Junior College, White House, Independent School Districts for conducting elections. So do I have a motion to approve both of those action items?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion passes. That's all we have. We have an executive session coming up. Marty, are we going to have any action coming out of executive session to your knowledge?
No, sir.
Nope. Okay. Well, good deal. Well, we will move into executive session now.